When a company wants to launch a product globally, they rely on a powerful psychological shortcut, the country of origin effect. For decades, a nation's reputation has served as a proxy for consumer trust. You buy engineering from Germany, electronics from Japan, and design from Italy. Marketers build multi-billion-dollar international campaigns on this foundation. They lean heavily on their home country's economic prestige to guarantee sales abroad. But there is a massive blind spot in the data. Nearly all the foundational research proving the country of origin effect was conducted on Western consumers, buying highly complex, durable goods like cars or appliances. That raises a question. What happens when you apply those exact same Western marketing principles to fast-moving consumer goods, like raw chicken, in a completely different cultural market, like the Middle East? According to a deep dive study into consumer behavior in Saudi Arabia, the traditional playbook falls apart. The standard dimensions that predict buying behavior in the West fail to predict anything here. Assuming your nation's technological prestige will automatically open wallets across all cultures is a highly expensive mistake. To sell in these markets, global brands have to tear down their existing models and start over. We can visualize this using an analytical model. At the far right is buying intention. Will the customer actually pay? In standard Western models, the two heaviest predictors of this are the producing nation's technological background and economic development. Let's plug the Saudi Arabian whole chicken data into this exact flowchart. The predictive power completely evaporates. The data shows that a country's technological and economic background has a negligible effect on whether a Saudi consumer buys their chicken. If you are selling a luxury automobile, tech and economics are exactly what the buyer is looking at. A country's economic reputation is highly elastic. It can dictate the global market for cars and electronics, and then instantly vanish the moment the product category changes. This brings us to the environmental context of Saudi Arabia, a deeply conservative Islamic society where daily routines are heavily governed by religious principles. When we update our flowchart to reflect this reality, two completely different variables take the lead. Cultural background and religious background step in as the primary drivers of buying intention. For meat specifically, this hinges entirely on the concept of halal. This requires strict, non-negotiable adherence to Islamic law regarding the processing of the animal. Religion in this model does not act as a secondary preference or a slight bonus to brand appeal. It functions as an absolute binary filter. If a consumer lacks trust that the producing countries strictly adhered to these religious standards, their intention to purchase drops to zero, regardless of the price. Alignment with religious law overrides any perceived objective quality of the product. Trust in the unseen, verified process outranks the prestige of the producer. We also add a branded product cluster to our model, mapping traits like perceived quality, taste, packaging, and brand sincerity. The results are counterintuitive. Across 7 of 8 countries studied, these brand dimensions failed to connect to buying intention entirely. To understand why the brand failed, researchers point to the theory of low-involvement purchasing. Fast-moving goods like raw chicken are daily commodities.
The buyer decides in seconds. They are not engaging in deep processing or comparing brand personalities. Contrast that with buying a television. That is a high-involvement decision, where consumers spend weeks agonizing over brand reputation and spec sheets. For low-involvement groceries, sinking millions of dollars into developing a unique brand personality is wasted capital. At the moment of purchase, the brand itself is functionally invisible. There is one more psychological factor that disrupts the model: consumer ethnocentrism. This is the ingrained preference for locally produced goods over imported ones out of a sense of national loyalty. When we add an ethnocentrism node to our analytical map, it acts as a massive intercepting force, cutting across the standard rational decision pathways. The survey of Saudi female consumers revealed exactly how powerful this local force is in everyday shopping practice. Respondents clearly demonstrated a paradox. They were perfectly willing to buy the locally sourced chicken, even while explicitly acknowledging that the imported product was of higher objective quality. This cultural bias actively breaks traditional economic models, which assume humans will always rationally maximize quality and minimize cost. Ethnocentrism effectively severs the baseline marketing assumption that higher perceived quality will automatically translate into actual buying behavior. Uncovering these specific behavioral patterns required a multi-year PhD study, prioritizing academic depth over a standard market scan. The researchers hit an immediate major roadblock. The standard widely used measurement scales for country of origin effects lacked both validity and reliability when deployed in the Middle East. Before collecting hard data, they had to run a qualitative phase. They conducted key informant interviews and focus groups specifically to recalibrate their measurement scales for a highly conservative society. Only after that cultural calibration could they move to the quantitative phase, deploying the survey accurately to targeted, purposive quota subsamples of real consumers. This highlights the difficulty of applying unmodified Western conceptualizations to non-Western subjects. In this case, the standard tools initially failed to capture the nuances of the local market. Failing to adapt measurement tools to the local cultural matrix results in data that obscures the actual drivers of behavior. This leaves us with a fully adapted analytical model for conservative FMCG markets. Technology, economics, and brand parity recede into the background. Religion, culture, and ethnocentrism become the dominant, heavily weighted forces driving the purchase. When contrasted directly against the standard global model we started with, the geometry of consumer trust looks entirely different. The country of origin effect is not a static property that a nation can simply export. It is a highly volatile variable that morphs entirely based on the product category and the local culture. For global exporters, the lesson is clear. You cannot rely on your nation's general economic prestige to force market entry. Gaining access to the Middle Eastern market requires a ground-up adaptation strategy. Local cultural prerequisites and religious trust outrank the prestige of a global brand. To truly understand the global consumer, marketers must stop trying to make the world fit their models and start building models that actually fit the world.